Continuation of Fulton Sheen's God and the Intelligence. Chapter 8. Critical Appreciation of the Modern Objections Against Intelligence. In the criticism of intelligence made by modern philosophers, abstraction has been made to appear as the outcome of man's evolution. As man developed from the lower forms of the higher, he found himself under the necessity of handling matter for practical and scientific purposes. Being tool-making by nature, abstraction developed in him to fit experience into convenient molds of action. Conceptual knowledge, thus represented by M. Bergson, is a development from below and in response to new needs, and is an essentially imperfect operation. For St. Thomas, the reason of conceptual knowledge is just the contrary. We must keep in mind he insists that human intelligence is not the unique nor the perfect form of intelligence. When Averroes made intelligibility in se equal human comprehensibility, he said, "A ridiculous thing. The human intelligence is only one of the forms of the intelligence, and that the lowest form, as has been shown, man is the only intellectual being with a body. The very fact that the more perfect intellectual being has no body proves that the intelligence does not of itself require a body. Human intelligence does require a body, it is true, but not because the body is the organism by which the intellect functions. Rather, it is because human intellect operates on material things. The body is necessary for the action of the intellect, says St. Thomas, not as its organ of action, but on the part of the object. For the phantasm is to the intellect what color is to the sight. The higher forms are the angelic and the divine. Man, strictly speaking, is not intellectual, he is rational. Rationality is a quality proper to the animal genus, and is not to be attributed either to God or to angels. The divine and the angelic intelligence, being free from matter, are much more powerful than our own, for matter is the reason of unintelligibility. Human intelligence united with an animal organism must operate on matter. It is therefore natural for it to use phantasms, but at the same time, being intelligent and thus serving as the link between the world of matter and that of spirit, man participates in a finite way in the light which makes all things intelligible, namely the light of God. This light has been given to intellectual creatures in a graduated way, those which are more near to God participating in it more fully than those at a greater distance. If our intelligence, as it is naturally constituted on this earth, could receive the light that is given to the angels, we would have no further need of sense knowledge, nor would we have any further need of abstraction. The angels see more in their ideas than we see in ours, because the light of their intelligence is greater. Light is that which manifests anything according to the faculty of vision. In an extended sense, it signifies a manifestation in the order of knowledge. The human soul, in the natural order, has received only a small endowment of this light. Thanks to this light, however, which operates in one way through the active intellect, we are able to seize the ratio of things. Abstraction, then, is a necessity in virtue of the weakness of the intellectual light in us. To say that our intellect lacks the light of God and the angels, a light which reveals the particular in the universal and the individuals in the species, and the defect of which must be supplied by abstraction, is equivalent to saying that abstraction is an imperfection. And this is precisely the common sense notion. Common sense philosophy has not defended abstraction because it has regarded it as a perfection. It has merely insisted on its necessity as a result of our present condition on earth. It is universally admitted that it is an imperfection. The angelic doctor explicitly calls it such. In his treatise on spiritual creatures, he writes, "Abstraction is an imperfection of the intellectual operation. The light of man's intelligence is like the twilight compared to that of God and the angels, and hence his intellectual vision is obscure." Abstraction, then, from the ontological point of view, is not the development from a lower form in response to human needs. It is not our nearness to the beast which makes it necessary. It is our distance from God. Knowledge is not a push from below, but a gift from above. Being more perfect than the lower forms, man cannot come nor develop from them, for the more perfect cannot come from the less perfect. Abstraction has not been formed in an eternal demeanor, because man became a tool maker. It has been given by an eternal light, because that light is the destiny of man. It is an imperfection, but it is an imperfection with a promise. And its promise is the light, the life, and the love, God Himself. Among the generality of modern thinkers, abstraction is represented either as a work of addition or as a work of subtraction. As addition, in that it considers some special aspect in which certain experiences resemble one another as mentally isolated from the aspects in which they differ. It is subtractive in that it strips of little by little the differences in certain common experiences until the general is discovered. In both of these cases, abstraction functions only after several experiences of objects which have something in common. What is to be thought of this notion? Abstraction, in the true sense of the word, does not require a variety of experiences from which the common element is abstracted. One experience only, that is, one object, is sufficient in form on intelligible species. The idea of metal can be formed from one experience of gold, and is not necessarily dependent on our experiences of silver and brass and iron. As Mr. Stout implies, one triangle is sufficient to form the concept of a triangle. Furthermore, if we find what is common in many experiences, we imply that that which is common to each is there previously to our finding it. St. Thomas, in speaking of abstraction, uses the singular form, implying thereby that it is not necessary for a multitude of experiences that we draw the intelligible species. It is from the particular, and not from the common factor among particular objects, that we make our abstraction. When seeking the essence of an object, the intelligence is satisfied with one material thing, and does not need many material things except accidentally. A comparison between sense abstraction and intellectual abstraction also makes this clear. Whatever two things are intimately united one to the other, one can be known without the other. One apple is sufficient in order that the eye may consider the color without any consideration of the odor. So likewise, the intellect can consider some form without the individual notes of that form. Two apples are not necessary in order that we may consider in one case the color of the apple, and in another its odor. So likewise, one metallic substance is sufficient in which to consider the essence of metal, without any reference to its individuating notes. But neither of these arguments goes to the root of the question. They are merely introductions to the main argument, which is this: abstraction, as we shall show, abstractions the form from the individual phantasm presented by sense knowledge. But each individual object has its own form. Socrates has the form of man as well as Aristotle. Napoleon has it as well as Washington. That which makes each one a man is in him individually, as well as it is 1,000 men. If it were not so, he would not be a man. If human nature belonged only to many men, as something common to them all, we would never say that Socrates or Plato has a human nature. Humanity is proper to man as man. The universal, by its very nature, can be in many things, but of course does not necessarily inhere in many things. There are certain universal which actively and contain one singular, for example, the sun and the moon. Now, if a certain community among various experiences were essential for an intelligible species, we would never have an idea of the sun or the moon, but merely an image of it. So true is the fact, viz., that the nature of things is in one thing as well as in many. That St. Thomas has said that so far as the object known is concerned, no one intellect can know the same thing better than another intellect. Otherwise it would not know the thing as it is. The modern notion of abstraction as addition represents it as proceeding by synthesis. The root of the modern error on this subject is that its theories of knowledge begin at the wrong end. Modern thinkers consider the universals as posterior to the singulars, while the scholastics consider the universal as prior to singulars. Multiplicity and plurality increase as we descend in the order of perfection. The particulars should therefore be posteriors in the ontological order of the universals. The parts of definition are never prior to the whole. The perfect must precede the imperfect. It is because each thing is the realization of an idea in the mind of God that is intelligible, and that it can be known. The idea that the architect has of a house precedes the idea which is found materialized in the house itself. Keeping in mind that the term intelligence is not restricted to human intelligence, but extends even to the angelic and the divine. Let us see the effect of the modern theory of abstraction in these other intellectual realms. If intellectual knowledge came only from the addition or the subtraction of individual experiences, then God and angels would never know unless they drew their knowledge from the sense experience. Angels know the individuals only through their ideas. In the ideas which they have received from God, they see the particular realizations. The Supreme Being, who is the cause of all things, and who has made all things according to his eternal ideas, sees all things in his essence, even down to the minutest particulars of his creation. He knows them in his essence, and not in their material manifestations. If divine ideas ontologically depend on the particulars, then the unit would depend on the multiple, the perfect on the imperfect, and the intelligible on the sensible, the cause on the effect. Such a theory stands the world on its head, and instead of explaining it, renders it unintelligible. It has been shown that abstraction is not the separation of differences in a variety of similar experiences, for one particular contains the nature of the thing just as much as a multiplicity of the same particulars. But may it not be that abstraction is a separation of the individual notes, the stripping off of the particular differences in order that the intelligible may appear? Here there is an approach to the exact nature of the abstraction, mingled with the confusion of the accidental with the substantial. It is to be regretted that Some writer, anxious to popularize the great masters of scholastic thought, and bent more on studying second-hand than primary sources, have defined abstraction as the stripping off of individual notes so as to arrive at the nature of the essence of a thing. Such an explanation is not absolutely false, but it prepares the way for a misunderstanding. It implies that the stripping off of the individual notes is a real positive exfoliation, whereas, de facto, it is merely something negative. In abstracting the form from the phantasm, the individual notes are disregarded, and the stripping off of the individual notes is not the cause of the form appearing. The individual notes, as Chesterton says, do not appear under the light of the active intellect. Hence the nature presented in the phantasm is used, though not its individual notes. The form is abstracted from the matter, and the form is not the result of the stripping off of the individual notes. In this figure, and here he shows a circle with a B under it, and a smaller circle inside with an A under it. In this figure, let A represent the form and B the individuating matter, and let the composite of A and B equal the thing. Abstraction in the strict sense of the term is not the stripping off of B to come to an A, after the manner in which we peel an onion to come to its center. Abstraction is rather the illumination of the intelligibility in A, which moves the active intellect without any consideration of B. The illumination of the phantasm reveals not everything which is in it, as we have said, but only its nature. In revealing the intelligibility without the matter is neglected, and thus it is that the form is separated from its individuating notes. The X-ray, to which the light of the active intellect may be compared, shines on the hand and reveals the bones without the skin. St. Thomas explains this process in these words: not only does the active intellect throw light on the phantasm, it does more. By its own power, it abstracts the intelligible species from the phantasm. It throws light on the phantasm, because just as the sensitive part acquires a greater power by its conjunction with the intellectual part, so by the power of the active intellect, the phantasms are made more fit for the abstraction, their form of intelligible intentions. Furthermore, the active intellect abstracts the intelligible species from the phantasm, inasmuch as by the power of the active intellect we are able to disregard the condition of individuality, and to take into our consideration the specific nature, the image of which informs the passive intellect. Abstraction, therefore, is not the consideration of some special aspect in which certain experiences resemble one another as mentally isolated from the aspects in which they differ. It does not mean to leave out what is different in particular instances compared, and to add together what they possess in common. It is not the association and the addition of elements, nor the isolation of the qualities of an individual in order to make that quality representative of a genus, but it is the extraction by an illuminative act of what is intelligible in things, their ratio. This brings us to the objection of the block universe, according to which the world is split up into rigid categories. But remark that up to this point the universal has not been considered as universal. The reason for this is that by direct and spontaneous abstraction, the ratio or intelligibility in things is revealed as much and independently of its existence in this individual or in 1,000. Neither plurality nor individuality is the concern of the mind at the moment of direct abstraction. For exactly the same reason, the ratio or essence, as it is known in the first moment of abstraction, is known neither as genus nor as species. Rather, what is revealed is the foundation of universality of genus and species, but not the universal itself as reliable in the individuals. This being clear, the charge brought against the scholastic position by James and others, that the abstraction gives only a world of genus and species, is contrary to the true nature of abstraction. It is only by another act of the mind that the universality of the idea is revealed. This second act of the mind is the act of reflection. But why the two operations? Have they a real title to existence? Most certainly. Man is a composite of body and soul. Man knows by both sense and intellect. Without a body or without matter, man would never need the reflective process. Without a spiritual and intellectual soul, he could never have direct abstraction. The double process is necessary then, because man is composed of body and soul. The idea, in the sense of being a genus or species, i.e., a universal in the sense of being applicable to many things, is due to this reflex act of the mind, by which it turns back on the concept obtained by abstraction. In virtue of this relation determined by the reflex act, the essence becomes endowed with a double character. First, that of unity, inasmuch as the essence is one. Secondly, multiplicity, because applicable to many things, at least in a confused way. Universals, whether genus, species, or the like, are not products of the mind, as the ratio or essence is not a production of the mind. They are the fruit of a contact with the sensible reality. Instead, therefore, of abstraction being a cutting up process, it is true rather to say that the sense and the sensible images are responsible for breaking up reality. The modern philosophers, therefore, in rejecting abstraction for having cut up the world, should rather have rejected the senses. If we had no sense, and if there were no matter, we would have no such problem as the multiplicity of the nature indicated by the universals. We would see all the possible individual realizations in the idea itself, as does the angel. Our knowledge would then be much higher than it is now. Another criticism opponents have argued against the intellect is that its knowledge is imperfect. It gives us only the general, not the particular. It knows the rose in its universal element, but not its color, size, environment, and particular beauty. All this is quite true. The intellect does not see the particular, but our senses do. That is the purpose of our senses and the intellect. By conversion to phantasms and by reflection, can turn back upon the individuals and apply the universal idea to them. Why criticize the intellect for a function which is supplied by that which is its necessary accompaniment in our present stage of existence, namely the senses? Such a criticism of the intellect is equivalent to forswearing the use of knives because we cannot sew with them. We have a needle for sewing and a knife for cutting, and one does not exclude the other. And what is more, though the intellect does not seize the particular directly, but indirectly, it nevertheless possesses a knowledge of the thing higher than pure sense perception. For the sensible image in sense is the likeness of only one individual thing, and can give the knowledge of only one individual. But the intelligible species of our intellect is the likeness of the thing as regards its specific nature, which is participle by infinite particulars. Hence our intellect, by the help of the intelligible species of man, is a certain way knows infinite men, not however a distinguished from each other, but as communicating in the nature of the species, and the reason is that the intelligible species of our intellect is the likeness of man, not as the individual principles, but as to the principles of the species. As our intellect is infinite in power, so does it know the infinite. For its power is indeed infinite, inasmuch as it is not terminated by corporal matter. A knowledge of ratio of the triangle is worth more than its sense knowledge. A knowledge applicable to all times is worth more than a knowledge limited to this particular moment. A knowledge indefinitely producible is worth more than a knowledge of singularity. This remark brings us more into the heart of the problem of the value of conceptual knowledge. At the outset, we run counter to the attacks made on the concept by M. Blondel, M. Bergson, and a host of other thinkers, for whom the concept is either a mere effigy or else an impoverished sensation. The first argument argued against it is that it is merely a symbol of reality and not reality itself. M. Bergson has called it a rubric under which we write all living beings. M. Blondel has called it artificata. The presumption at the bottom of these and similar critiques is that the concept does not reveal reality, but merely gives a substitute for it. Such criticism applies to the Cartesians as well as to some of its decadent antecedents, but in no way does it apply to the Thomistic doctrine. It applies also to the modern idealism, but is foreign to the thought of the Philosophia Perennis. Thomistic thought has always maintained and always will maintain, under the penalty of being false to common sense, that by the concept we attain, not to a picture of reality, but to the reality itself. This doctrine has been called by Dr. Noel the cornerstone of the critical reconstruction of philosophy. St. Thomas has given a whole article to the problem of the idea, asking whether it is that which we see or that by which we see. He first shows the false conclusions which follow from the theory that with the idea we remain with an effigy of things and do not attain to the thing itself. Namely, every science would be concerned, not with the objects outside the soul, but only with the ideas in the soul. And secondly, it would lead to a degenerate pragmatism, which maintains that whatever seems is true. Passing to the constructive side, the angelic doctor continues, there is a twofold action. One remains in the agent, for instance, to see and to understand. Another passes into an external object, for instance, to heat and to cut. Each of these actions proceeds in virtue of some form, and as the form from which proceeds an act tending to something external is the likeness of the object of the action, as heat in the heater is the likeness of the thing heated, so the form from which proceeds an action remaining in the agent is the likeness of the object. Hence that by which the sight sees is the likeness of the visible thing, and the likeness of the thing understood. That is the idea, is the form by which the intellect understands. But since the intellect reflects upon itself, by such reflection, it understands both its own act of intelligence and the idea by which it understands. Thus the idea is that which is understood secondarily. But that which is understood primarily is the object, of which the idea is a likeness. That which is known by the intellectual vision are the things themselves, and not their images or effigies. The stone is that which is known, and not the idea of the stone, except indirectly by the act of reflection when the intellect turns back upon itself. Otherwise, our knowledge would be only of ideas instead of things. The idea, then, is not that which we see, it is that by which we see. The difference between these two notions sums up the fundamental differences which separate modern idealism in all its forms from Thomistic realism. The idea is not a substitute for reality, nor is it a museum of samples, as M. Blondel would have us believe, nor is it a rubric under which we catalogue an object, as M. Bergson believes it to be. It is neither a portrait nor an individual sign like a medal, which is first known before making known. It is a sign the like of which does not exist in the material world of bodies. It is a formal sign, the nature of which is to signify and to make known before being itself known by reflection. The problem of knowledge posited in these words, how can we be sure that the idea corresponds with the reality, does not exist for St. Thomas. There can be no question of correspondence when there is presence or identity. It is the real immediately which I know, but of something beyond thought is unthinkable. It is said, but the real is not something beyond thought. It is independent and presented. Whether I welcome it or refuse it, my love or my hate can never alter or change it. Whether it pleases me to say so or to believe it, there will never be another truth for me than that which expresses it. There is no problem of correspondence, since there is no error where there is identity. The abstractive intuition of essence is without error. Error can exist only where there is composition, and here there is no composition. The fault of modern idealism is to make the idea a closed object instead of an open relation, and to rest in the consideration of the photograph of a thing instead of the thing photographed. A representation which is not the representation of anything is, at the same time, and under the same formal relation, relative and non-relative. The idea is never the direct object of the knowledge of the intellect, but only the indirect, and it is only by another act, a reflex one, that the intellect attains the idea. The thing is always known before the idea of things, because the idea terminates in the essence of the thing known, and the thing known is in the sense order. It must not be imagined that the idea has no necessary or universal value. The idea by reflex abstraction is still universal, so far as the manner of knowing the thing is concerned, namely, stripping of matter which prevents its communicability, but not formally universal as regards the nature represented. For the things outside the mind is singular according to its mode of being, but is universal according to its nature. I think we'll stop here and continue this chapter in our next session.